Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, and that was the closing bell on Wall Street as markets finished the day slightly lower against the backdrop of soaring oil and gas prices from the war against Iran. As President Trump signals he will continue to blockade Iran until it agrees to give up its nuclear ambitions. Markets also closing after the Federal Reserve's decision to leave interest rates unchanged. Chairman Powell speaking to reporters this afternoon, likely for the last time as chair, with President Trump's replacement poised to take the reins. Powell expressing concern about the administration's attacks against him and the central bank, while also cautioning that the conflict in the Middle East is driving up energy prices and causing economic uncertainty. Listen.
The economic outlook remains highly uncertain, and the conflict in the Middle East has added to this uncertainty. In the near term, higher energy prices will push up overall inflation. Beyond that, the scope and duration of potential effects on the economy remain unclear, as does the future course of the conflict itself.
Today, prices at the pump hitting a four-year high, $4.23 a gallon on average for regular gas. U.S. oil prices spiking as well, breaking $100 a barrel. At the same time, a major international benchmark for oil neared $120 a barrel, its highest level since 2022. In a meeting yesterday, President Trump told energy executives that the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports will continue, quote, for months if needed. That's according to a White House official. Speaking to reporters today, the president doubled down on that strategy.
Well, the blockade is genius, okay? The blockade has been 100% foolproof. It shows how good our Navy is, I can tell you that. Nobody's going to play games. Now they have to cry uncle. That's all they have to do, just say, we give up. We give up. But their economy is really in trouble. So it's a dead economy. They've come a long way. The question is whether or not they're going to go far enough. So at this moment, there will never be a deal unless they agree that there will be no nuclear weapons.
Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was on Capitol Hill today testifying before lawmakers for the first time since the war with Iran began. The defense secretary came out swinging. In his opening statement, he called out Democrats, calling them the biggest adversary in the Iran war.
The biggest challenge, the biggest adversary we face at this point are the reckless, feckless, and defeatist words of congressional Democrats and some Republicans 2 months in, I remind you, 2 months in to a conflict, 2 months in on an existential fight for the safety of the American people. Iran cannot have a nuclear bomb. We are proud of this undertaking. I am proud that President Trump has had the courage to do it, and I look forward to sharing more about what our troops have accomplished.
The hearing also comes as the Trump administration is facing a May 1st deadline, at which point the president will need congressional authorization to continue the war. Secretary Hegseth was repeatedly pressed today on the administration's strategy and whether the war has been a success. Take a listen.
How is this war going? Do you think we're winning?
Militarily on the battlefield, it's been an astounding military success.
No, but are we winning the war?
Absolutely.
Okay, so do you call Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz winning?
Well, I would say the blockade that we hold that doesn't allow anything to come in or out of Iranian ports.
Okay, so we've blockaded their blockade. So they blockaded us, and then we blockaded their blockade. That's like saying, tag, you're it.
In that same hearing, the Pentagon's top finance official estimated that to date, the war with Iran has cost $25 billion. Joining me now, our team of reporters, NBC News chief business correspondent Christine Romans, NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Cubie, NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, and NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez, who is in Doha for us. Christine, thank you for being here. I have to start with you, fresh off that press conference with Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. A lot going on from the Fed today, including the uncertainty over the Strait of Hormuz. How did markets react to that?
You've got oil prices rising today, and that's because of this sort of impasse in the Strait of Hormuz. And the Fed chief told us that inflation is misbehaving. Developments in the Middle East have caused energy prices to spike, and you're beginning to see that filter elsewhere into the economies. And we haven't even seen the peak of that yet. So very closely watching energy prices and what that particular shock is going to mean for consumers and the economy overall.
Yeah, Americans are watching energy prices incredibly closely as well. So the Fed, their big decision today, decided to keep rates unchanged. What's the impact? And take us inside the thinking there. How did they get to that decision?
The inside the thinking is what is the big news here. They didn't cut interest rates, but there were 4 of these decision makers who decided to dissent, who didn't agree with the Fed's decision today for different reasons. That's the most, Kristen, since October 1992. So that means Jerome Powell, this is his last meeting as Fed chief, he's handing over a Federal Reserve that is showing a little more uncertainty, maybe, inside the ranks than we have seen in recent memory.
And finally, Christine, Fed Chair Powell said that he is, in fact, planning to stay on as Fed governor. Talk about that decision and what that could mean for the incoming Fed chair.
It's historic. I mean, this hasn't happened in like 80 years. There is a tradition that if you're the Fed chief, then you leave. You leave the Fed, even if there's more time left on your seat as a governor. And Jerome Powell said he's going to stay on. He's so concerned about the legal attacks against the institution. This is a little bit of what he said.
After my term as chair ends on May 15, I will continue to serve as a governor for a period of time to be determined. I plan to keep a low profile as a governor. These legal actions by the administration are unprecedented in our 113-year history, and there are ongoing threats of additional such actions. I worry that these attacks are battering the institution and putting at risk the thing that really matters to the public, which is the ability to conduct monetary policy without taking into consideration political factors.
Now, the Department of Justice has said that it has dropped its probe into Powell and a big renovation project there. But you can see he is not satisfied that there won't be other legal attacks or a resumption of that probe in the future. He wants finality and clarity and transparency that these attacks are over before he's going to step aside.
Just to put a fine point on it, Christine, this is defiance from the Fed chair.
It absolutely is. And he says that, look, he made a point of saying the insults that we hear, the words that people say, we don't even talk about that inside this institution. It's not a problem. It's the legal attacks that are a problem there. And he will stay on TBD. He said he's not going to be a shadow Fed chair for the next person who's coming in. He's going to keep a very low profile, he says, but he wants to stay there in his seat until these legal challenges are truly and finally over.
Well, just an historic day at the Fed. We're so glad you were there and could bring us all of that reporting, Christine. Court, let me turn to you. Let's talk about this firing hearing that we all watched on Capitol Hill. Defense Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, answering questions. I want to play a little bit more and get your reaction on the other side. Look.
Well, their nuclear facilities have been obliterated. Underground, they're buried, and we're watching them 24/7. So we know where any nuclear material
reclaiming
might be.
my time for
we're
a quick second here. We had to start this war, you just said, 60 days ago, because the nuclear weapon was an imminent threat. Now you're saying that it was completely obliterated?
They had not given up their nuclear ambitions, and they had a conventional shield of thousands of missiles.
So Operation Midnight Hammer accomplished nothing of substance. It left us at exactly the same place we were before. So much so that
their facilities were bombed and obliterated. Their ambitions continued.
Just some of the many fireworks today. Court, what were some of your biggest takeaways in addition to that exchange?
Yeah, I mean, that really underscores just how there has been so much confusion about the ultimate military objectives here. And what's really funny to me, Kristen, is the administration has just not done a good job of explaining exactly what they hope to do with respect to Iranian nuclear facilities and their capabilities. And the goal, Secretary Hegseth touched on it a tiny bit there when he said it's about taking out their conventional capability so they don't have the ability to defend a nuclear program. But instead, they get so hung up on arguing about how their facilities were obliterated. They clearly weren't. They were deeply buried. They were badly destroyed in most cases. But there's still no indication that they have not only destroyed the highly enriched uranium stockpile, but that they have destroyed their capability and their ambitions to ultimately get a nuclear weapon. That was just one of the many exchanges that we saw about Iran today that really shows how there is frustration on both sides of the aisle on Capitol Hill about the lack of transparency, about the objectives and the ultimate aims here of this war.
Well, it was just a remarkable hearing. Courtney, let me ask you, because to the key point that you're making about the administration, the president's strategy, did Secretary Hegseth reveal any new information?
No, not really. I mean, we did learn about the $25 billion cost, the price tag of Operation Epic Fury right now, but it's still not 100% clear exactly what that encompasses. So, for instance, is that sort of the burn rate of what they've been going through? So the munitions that they've used, the aircraft that have been damaged or destroyed, just the wear and tear on things. Those ships, 3 carrier strike groups, once they're out on a deployment like that, especially the Ford, they're going to be in the docks for a while, like a year plus. It's very expensive, and there's also the destroyers and everything else. Does that cost also encompass rebuying new munitions and buying new aircraft? All that, it's not really clear. And then we don't even know if it includes the cost of the blockade, which is also extremely expensive and has no end in sight.
And Court, he was also pressed on the firing of the Army Chief of Staff, Randy George. What did he say about that?
That was another one that was bipartisan. At least 2 Republican members also weighed in on that. One of them was Don Bacon, Congressman, Republican, planning to retire. He's a retired 1-star general, so it's not surprising he's been outspoken. But what was really remarkable about that, it's the first time that we've heard from Secretary Hegseth about that firing, because he's not answered questions before. He didn't deny that he was behind those firings, but he didn't apologize for them either. And he said that it was about cleaning up the department that had been, damaged for years by certain perceptions. So he didn't address it directly, but he didn't deny it.
It was a fascinating day for Capitol Hill. You were there to cover it.
It's been a long day, long hearing.
Well, thank you for bringing us all of that information, Court and Christine. We really appreciate it. Great to see you both. Monica Alba, let me turn to you at the White House. I know you've been working your sources throughout the day. What are the discussions that you are hearing? I know that one of the key focuses is whether and how and when the president may decide to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. What are you hearing about that, Monica?
Yeah, we heard a little bit from the president himself today to build upon some of the reporting that Courtney and I have been able to do about what options the president was presented with on Monday in a Situation Room meeting that we've learned a little bit more about. We know that they have been having ongoing discussions about what might happen next, the ongoing blockade, which the president does continue to say he believes is incredibly effective. He says and is arguing that he even believes that the naval blockade could be more effective than, quote, bombing. So it sounds like that is the strategy for the moment, while they still weigh and make a big decision that we understand hasn't been finalized yet about whether the president is going to potentially pursue other options before making a decision about exactly what the next steps are here. But what the president did sort of rule out for now, Kristen, is he said that he wasn't going to be sending his top aides, his negotiating team, in person to any potential negotiations in Pakistan or anywhere else for the moment, saying instead that there have been some communications telephonically over the phone and that those conversations maybe will continue, though it's unclear exactly who's a part of them and where they could go. So it does seem the president is at this crossroads. He's been at them for a long time during the course of this 8-week conflict to make a decision about whether he wants to escalate or whether he wants to pursue a different path. But ultimately, it seems like he's pretty convinced on keeping the blockade in place, at least for now. Kristen.
Well, it's just so striking because you have to wonder what the impact will be on the energy markets and oil and the price of gas, of course, at the pump. Monica, let me ask you, because, of course, the president is facing a May 1 deadline. That's 60 days. By law, he has to then go to Congress, get authorization to continue any military conflict. And I know that there's a big debate about that brewing on Capitol Hill. What do we know about how he's approaching this deadline, Monica?
We have asked the White House this repeatedly, Kristen, and they haven't really told us how they view this deadline that is, as you point out, a clear law that is mandated in terms of notifying and getting and seeking approval from Congress. There is a little bit of a debate, it seems like, about the interpretation of the 60 days, given that there is currently a ceasefire in place. And we know that people like Vice President Vance have been a little bit dismissive about the interpretation of the War Powers Act and whether this is something that would really be necessary, even though it is very clear from lawmakers of both parties that that is what they want and expect the president to do. So we are kind of watching and waiting with everybody else to see exactly how the White House approaches this.
And Monica, just finally, we learned the president spoke to Vladimir Putin today. What can you tell us about that?
And a pretty lengthy phone call, which it typically is, given you have to allow for the interpreters, but about an hour and a half of conversation. And the president himself detailed that they talked about a lot of different things, that they talked about the war in Iran. And he was even asked whether he believes the war in Iran or the war in Ukraine will end first. And the president said, well, maybe they're both going to end on a sort of similar timetable, which really raises a lot of questions about the timing for both of those very serious conflicts.
Certainly does. Monica Alba at the White House, as always, thank you so much. Good to see you. Let me turn to Raf Sanchez, reporting from Doha. Raf, thank you so much for joining us. Take us inside your conversations there in the region. What is the mood with negotiations now stalled?
So, Kristen, in a word, the mood is uncertainty. It's quiet here in the Gulf. It's been a couple of weeks since the skies were full of Iranian missiles and drones. But people here are on edge. They have no idea if or when the fighting might resume. You notice people are flinching when doors slam after weeks and weeks of bombardment here. And there is a real feeling among America's Arab allies here in the Gulf that they are just not in control of their own destiny. They are kind of at the mercy of the United States and Iran. Either side could declare an end to this ceasefire at any point. And of course, the Strait of Hormuz, which is so critical to the economies of these countries, remains shut, and they just have absolutely no sense, like the rest of the world, when it might reopen. Kristen?
Well, and Raf, the president saying he's prepared to actually maintain the U.S. blockade of Iran's ports. What are the implications for Gulf nations? And I believe you spoke to the Qatar foreign minister about that.
Yeah, so the implications absolutely massive. Qatar, one of the world's biggest exporters of liquefied natural gas. Of course, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, some of the world's biggest oil exporters. These are economies that totally depend on getting their energy exports out. And yeah, we had an opportunity to speak to the spokesman for the Qatari Foreign Ministry about U.S. policy towards the Strait. Take a listen to a little bit of that conversation. Would you like to see the United States end its own blockade in the Strait as a way of lowering tensions?
No, let me make it very clear. The closing of the Strait of Hormuz has resulted in economic implications for the whole world. So our focus is on ending that war, on reaching a diplomatic solution that hopefully would mean that we would not resort back to the use of the Strait as leverage. But of course, we call on all parties to open the Strait immediately.
And I asked him whether he was open, his country was open, to the latest Iranian proposal, which is a narrow deal, Kristen, that would reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but it would leave the nuclear issue for another day. He said Qatar, like the other Gulf states, wants to see a comprehensive agreement between the U.S. and Iran to make sure that there is not a resumption of fighting a year from now. But he did say they are open to some kind of incremental deal, which, if it would open the Strait, would be a good thing for the whole region. Kristen.
Just so much uncertainty. Raf Sanchez, thank you so much. Thank you for bringing us your great exchange there. We really appreciate it. Coming up, new details about the assassination attempt at the White House Correspondents' Dinner and new images released by federal prosecutors of the gunman as he prepared for the attack. Plus, my one-on-one with Democratic Congressman and former Army Ranger Jason Crow about the questions he put to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth today on the Hill and much more. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Turning now to breaking news tied to the Department of Justice. Former FBI Director James Comey appearing in federal court today. Comey surrendering to authorities in Alexandria, Virginia, a day after a grand jury in North Carolina indicted him on 2 counts related to threats against the president. The grand jury saying Comey knowingly and willfully threatened the life and bodily harm of the president. Comey denies the charges and said he is innocent. The indictment stemming from this picture the former FBI director posted on social media last year of seashells on a beach arraigned to say 8647. 86 is a term that can mean to get rid of. And Trump is, of course, the 47th president. This afternoon, President Trump told reporters he believes Comey's post was, in fact, a threat. Look.
Well, if anybody knows anything about crime, they know 86. You know what 86? It's a mob term for kill him. You know? You ever see the movies? 86 him. The mobster says to one of his wonderful associates, 86 him. That means kill him. It's, I think of it as a mob term. I don't know, people think of it as something having to do with disappearing, but the mob uses that term to say when they want to kill somebody.
But do you really think your life was in danger?
Probably, I don't know. You know, based on what I'm seeing out there, yeah, the people like Comey have created tremendous danger, I think, for politicians and others.
It comes as Justice Department officials release new documents and new details about Saturday night's assassination attempt at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, including new photos of the suspected gunman, Cole Allen. You can see them here. The DOJ says he took this in his hotel room, arming himself with an array of weaponry shortly before the attack. Now, other photos include these two guns, which investigators say Allen had with him when he was arrested, along with knives and other weapons in his possession. The Justice Department filing also depicted the dramatic moment Allen charged through a security checkpoint 1 floor above the ballroom where the dinner was being held and allegedly opened fire. NBC News senior justice reporter Ryan Riley joins me now. I do want to start with the White House Correspondents' Dinner attack. Let's talk about today's DOJ filing. What stood out to you? And of course, those just really astonishing photos.
Yeah, well, first of all, our colleague Kelly O'Donnell just confirmed that the shot that, according to two law enforcement officials, the shot that was fired that struck an officer was fired by the suspect. And that was sort of a question. So this was not a friendly fire.
So this is significant. Let's just pause right here because there have been a lot of questions about who in fact struck the Secret Service officer. You are saying that law enforcement officials have now confirmed that they believe it was the suspect.
Yeah, that's according to our own Kelly O'Donnell. And I think, overall, this lays out exactly how he got to D.C. There's some talk about him taking the train. He was taking notes on his trip to Chicago and then to D.C. And then he went into, and he was actually, he read stories about what was happening during the White House Correspondents Association dinner and the weekend, right? So he looked actually at one of the things I found that he looked at a list from the Georgetowner that showed all the events that were happening that weekend. And so, there was a theoretical universe in which he could have targeted some other event and not just the most highly secured component of this, which was, of course, obviously inside of the dinner that evening.
Wow, that's really chilling. And any more details about that photo? He took it in the moments before he decided to carry out this attack. The sense that he was watching it unfold, was confident the president was in the room, right, before he went down.
I mean, the thing that struck me also is it seemed like he was trying to blend in, right? He has relatively, he has a suit, he has a tie on, right? He has a black shirt on. So it's not as though he kind of might have blended in some respects. And remember, you also had individuals who were undercover in that capacity who were dressed, in the ballroom and around that area in suits who you did not realize necessarily right off the bat were law enforcement who were armed. And so this was a really dangerous situation. He gets right past that initial barricade and then he was taken down shortly thereafter.
Yeah, well, we thank law enforcement for keeping everyone safe. Let me ask you about James Comey, this new indictment. What are the latest steps? He appeared in court today.
Yeah, he made that initial appearance in Alexandria. That's not where the case is going to play out. It's going to play out ultimately in North Carolina. But I did get a chance to question the acting attorney general, Todd Blanche, today about this case and asked him how confident he was whether or not this would ultimately result in a conviction. Because under the Justice Manual, you're not supposed to bring forward a case unless you actually think there's a high likelihood of you being able to secure a conviction. And he said he's not sure exactly how the jury will ultimately handle this case. He said that, it's not smart for prosecutors to predict how any jury will ultimately handle a case. But every legal expert I've talked to across the board, and even a lot of conservatives who normally are very defensive of the president, have publicly posted about how they just don't see this case having any chance of success. It's going to be dismissed at one of these early motions just because, on First Amendment grounds, on retaliation grounds, that this is all driven by the president. So the likelihood that this even gets to the jury ultimately, I think, is pretty slim.
Ryan Riley with a lot of breaking developments for us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Jason Crow of Colorado, who serves on the House Armed Services and Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thank you so very much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kristen. Good to be with you.
Well, it's wonderful to have you. I do want to start with the indictment of former FBI Director James Comey. You have also been a target of this administration when they tried but failed to indict you over that video you made. You told troops that they can disobey orders that they deem to be illegal. What was your reaction to this latest indictment of James Comey?
This is another example of the Trump administration weaponizing Americans' Department of Justice against Donald Trump's political enemies, using their taxpayer dollars, people who are supposed to be focused in Washington and elsewhere on cybercrime, on elder fraud, on healthcare fraud, on organized crime, on violent crime around our country, are instead being used to settle scores by Donald Trump. Right? Americans should be upset about this more than anybody else because it's their money and it's their prosecutors who are being used and abused for purposes that Donald Trump sees fit in any given day.
Let's talk about the actual indictment. It says that these numbers, we'll put them up on the screen again, 8647 are a threat to take the life of the president. You see them right there in seashells. Legal scholars, though many of them congressmen, say while the post might show poor judgment, it is protected political speech. How do you see this playing out? Do you have faith in the Justice Department?
Yeah, I think it was a bad idea, but is it a crime? Absolutely not a crime. I mean, I'll have to defer to Donald Trump. He says it's organized crime, slang, and criminal activity. I'll defer to him on that, and he's the expert on those issues. What I do know is that that term actually originated from 1930s diner slang when something was out of order or out of stock. So a lot of interpretations around it, but the larger issue remains the same, in that Donald Trump and his cronies and political hacks now at DOJ continue to do his bidding against political enemies. And it's the American people, it's the rule of law that suffers, right? He came after me back in February. He tried to indict me. He tried to send me to prison. You know, my high crime, telling service members to follow the law and obey the Constitution, right? So that's one of many examples of what this president is doing to erode our democracy and the rule of law in this country.
I want to play something that Republican Senator Tom Tillis said about the Comey indictment earlier today and get your reaction on the other side. Take a listen.
Hopefully there's more to it than just the picture in the sand. Otherwise, I just think it's another example of where we're going to regret this because we're setting a fairly low bar. And political physics, like I've said around here for years, is what it is. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction.
What do you make of that equal and opposite reaction? Do you think that there could be such a reaction from Democrats if they were to take back the House, for example, or the White House?
Well, my first reaction is I really hope that more Republicans, other than those who are retiring, like Tom Tillis, stand up and push back on this. Like, we need more than just retiring Republicans to show courage and to help us fight for the rule of law and our democracy. I'm glad that he is, but he's in very, very small company right now. So that's number one. Number two is, no, we're not like them, right? His comment is, oh, we're going to come back and do the same thing. No, we're not. Because guess what? We believe in the rule of law. We believe in democracy. Does that mean that we won't pursue accountability? No, we will pursue accountability. We will pursue justice. We will do so according to the law and according to the way that our democracy says it should be done. We are not like them, and we will not act like them.
Okay, let me turn now to the fiery hearing. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth appearing before the House Armed Services Committee, which, again, you sit on. I want to play a little bit of what he had to say when he was asked, what's the biggest threat to Americans right now? Here's what he said.
The biggest challenge, the biggest adversary we face at this point are the reckless, feckless, and defeatist words of congressional Democrats and some Republicans. 2 months in, I remind you, 2 months in to a conflict, 2 months in on an existential fight for the safety of the American people, Iran cannot have a nuclear bomb.
And Congressman, I should clarify, that was actually his opening statement. You are, of course, a veteran. You served in the Iraq War. What was your reaction to the argument that Democrats are threatening the safety of the American people?
Well, it's horrible when you have the sitting Secretary of Defense coming before committee in his opening statements, before any word is said on either side of the aisle, and said that we're the enemy of this country, we're the adversary. That kind of tells you everything you need to say. I mean, he is politicizing the military. He is changing the very face of what we have long cherished as a nonpartisan melting pot of this nation. I served 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. When I think of America, I still think of the faces of those paratroopers that I served with who are black, white, Asian, Hispanic, straight, gay, Republican, Democrat. We came together and we fought together. We were brothers and sisters. And Pete Hegseth has turned his back on that very notion. But what's more is he's also saying that we don't have the right as members of Congress to actually question wars and conflict. We just, get in line and just say it's okay to do whatever they want to do. That's not our role. That's not the Constitution. Again, I served in Iraq and Afghanistan. And to do that, our service members must know, they absolutely have to know, that members of Congress are sitting here in this Capitol asking tough questions, holding people to account, making sure that they're protected. That is our job. That is my commitment to our military men and women, and I will never back down from that.
Did you gain any more clarity on the goal of this war, Congressman, after this hearing today?
No, absolutely not. They still have not told us what their overall goal is. They have not told us what the off-ramp and the end game is, which is exactly why Americans don't support it. This is overwhelmingly unpopular. Donald Trump knows that. Pete Hegseth knows that. So they're just doubling and tripling down on it and frankly, lying to us about what is actually going on. America spent $5 to $8 trillion over the last 20 years, 7,000 American lives, our credibility. Tens of thousands of Americans came home bearing the invisible scars of this battle. The working class bore the burden of this, people that I was raised with and who I fought with. They have had enough. They've had enough of endless conflict in the Middle East, not being able to pay for their groceries, their health care, their housing, their rent and mortgage, while we spend tens of billions of dollars on endless conflict. I've had enough of it, and I'm not going to take their lies. I'm not going to sit there and just get in line, as Pete Hegseth wants me to do, and stop asking questions. I'm going to do everything possible to try to stop it.
I want to ask you about the assassination attempt that took place at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. You serve as the top Democrat in the bipartisan task force investigating the incident and the assassination attempt against President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. And after that incident, the head of Secret Service said that it would spark a, quote, paradigm shift in how it protects the president. Do you think there has, in fact, been a paradigm shift since Butler, Congressman?
I haven't seen that. As you mentioned, I helped lead that investigation because political violence is unacceptable. Doesn't matter where it comes from, doesn't matter what the reason is, doesn't matter who the target is. We must, as Americans, say never, never will we allow it, never is it justifiable. Right? And that's why I agreed to help lead this investigation. We did a comprehensive investigation over about 5 months, released a 180-page report with 37 recommendations for a very fundamental reform on how we protect the VIPs, the president, the vice president, members of Congress. What I want to know, my question is, how many of those 37 specific bipartisan reforms that every Democrat and Republican agreed to unanimously on that task force, how many of those have been implemented? Because we know what we need to do to raise defenses and protect people. The question is whether or not we have actually done that.
All right. Well, Congressman, we will continue to track that angle. Certainly. We really appreciate your joining us to discuss a range of topics. Congressman Jason Crow, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up next, a landmark decision today at the Supreme Court limiting the Voting Rights Act that could pave the way for more Republican redistricting and less representation in Congress for minorities. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Turning now to a major decision from the Supreme Court today. In a ruling that places new limits on the Voting Rights Act, which could have sweeping consequences in the battle for control of Congress in favor of Republicans. In a 6-3 decision, the court's conservative majority ruled that a congressional map in Louisiana, which was drawn to comply with the Voting Rights Act by ensuring the state had a certain number of districts represented by minority voters, was a, quote, unconstitutional racial gerrymander. The ruling opens the door for Republicans across multiple states to now redraw a number of districts currently represented by Democrats. The White House responding to the ruling, calling it a complete and total victory for American voters, and adding the color of one's skin should not dictate which congressional district you belong in. Democratic House Leader Hakeem Jeffries saying the Supreme Court, quote, has taken a blowtorch to the Voting Rights Act and making the case for Congress to pass an updated Voting Rights Act. Joining me now is NBC News senior Supreme Court reporter Lawrence Hurley and senior reporter Jane Tim. Thanks to both of you for being here. Lawrence, let me start with you. Take us through this ruling. What impact does it have on the Voting Rights Act, and just how significant is this?
Yeah, it's a very significant ruling. This case is basically a collision between long-running litigation over Louisiana's congressional district map and the conservative justices' long-held kind of suspicion about the Voting Rights Act and their belief in what they see as being a colorblind constitution. So in trying to draw a new map to comply with the Voting Rights Act, Louisiana added another minority-majority district, making 2, and then that map got challenged from the other side by non-minority voters, and a court struck it down as well. So now this comes to the Supreme Court. Justice Samuel Alito, writing the majority opinion, kind of following up his position in other cases, saying that the Constitution is basically colorblind. You shouldn't really be able to consider race at all in any kind of consideration of the law. The court just about left the door open to maybe some kind of racial gerrymandering claim in the future, but not really. And Justice Elena Kagan, one of the liberal justices, dissented and making the case that, well, really the court didn't leave the door open at all, saying it made Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act a dead letter, effectively.
Lawrence, fascinating stuff. Thank you. Jane, let me turn to you. We're 6 months away from the midterm elections. You've been working to figure out just how much of an impact this decision could have. What have you determined?
Yeah, my colleagues and I have been on the phone all day trying to get a sense of who is going to try and redraw their maps this year. Now, many primaries have actually already begun with early voting or have already been completed. In those states, it's going to be really unlikely that you're going to see new maps this year. And to be sure, the biggest impact of this ruling will come next year when I'd say more than a dozen states are likely to start redrawing their maps. But this year, we know there are some primaries still scheduled for later in the summer. Florida, of course, was doing their map today. But also look at Tennessee, Missouri, even Maryland, a blue state. Other states can still have time to redraw their maps if there is the legislative desire to in these states. Places like Louisiana are going to want to do this. They've made it clear in Alabama. The attorney general there has said they're going to look into this. They have another case that's been appealed to the Supreme Court about that. But this ruling will have far-fetching effects both on these midterms with a few seats that may change hands based on this, as well as in next year when you're going to see just sort of an all-out new era of redistricting with very few rules and guardrails.
Well, that's a great way to put it. We've already seen this big tit for tat over redistricting. The Florida legislature just passed a redistricting plan that would benefit Republicans. That comes on the heels of these legal challenges to Virginia's map being redrawn. Right now, who's on top, Jane?
Well, right now, I think this morning Democrats were on top. This afternoon, I think it's Republicans, whether or not that map has been signed into law. But it's important to say that this is all so not settled. I mean, Florida has a state constitutional prohibition on partisan gerrymandering, and their map, as you can see, is a very red map. They have made no mistakes about this, that they are intending to draw new Republican seats. Governor Ron DeSantis said today that he thinks that the Calais ruling actually invalidates the state prohibition on partisan gerrymandering and essentially trying to use that ruling to get his map across the finish line and through the courts in his state. But of course, this is all going to go to the courts, too.
Lawrence, just one more finally before I let you go. We had heard arguments today in a key case at the Supreme Court. What happened there?
Well, in this case, the court was debating the Trump administration's attempt to end what's called temporary protected status for immigrants who've come into the U.S. from Haiti and Syria, which is part of a broader anti-immigration program, as we know, and the administration has also tried to restrict it from other countries as well. And lower courts have blocked it. And as they've done with a lot of other cases, the Trump administration rushed up to the Supreme Court to try and get them to allow them to enact the policy. So we'll be getting a ruling on that soon. It kind of seems like it wasn't clear exactly how the court was going to rule on that case, but we'll be looking for that ruling in the weeks ahead.
All right. I know you'll stay on top of all of it. Lawrence, Jane, thank you both so much. Coming up after the break, we're live on Capitol Hill, where House Speaker Johnson is struggling to corral his Republican conference at a pivotal stretch for his party and the president. This is Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The House is set to vote on an extension of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act after clearing a key procedural hurdle earlier today, following hours of deliberation between party leadership and some rank-and-file Republicans who voiced concerns about warrantless surveillance. Joining me now is NBC News national political reporter Sahil Kapoor. So, Sahil, the House is set to vote any minute now on this measure. What are the prospects of Congress reaching a deal to reauthorize 702? And talk about the significance of 702 for folks who don't understand.
Yeah, absolutely, Kristen. The prospects have improved dramatically on this FISA Section 702 bill, 3-year reauthorization passing after they got that rule done. This was a long, drawn-out process, about 2 hours on the floor, where a group of conservative rebels had to be placated. One of the issues here was privacy advocates and civil liberties advocates on both the left of the Democratic Party and the right of the Republican Party have demanded reforms to Section 702, specifically protections such as a warrant requirement so the government cannot review the data of American citizens that gets swept up as part of this surveillance. They did not, Republican leadership, put a warrant requirement in here, but they put some more symbolic concessions that appear to have placated just enough Republicans to move this to a vote, including a monthly civil liberties review, a civil liberties protection officer, and beefing up criminal penalties for knowingly targeting Americans. Now, in these sorts of things, Kristen, as you know, they will lose some Republicans, but they'll likely win some Democrats because there's a vast group in the middle that is aligned with the national security establishment and both parties in favor of this program. If it does expire, the government believes that it will lose a really important tool to go after terrorist plots and espionage.
Let's talk about the implications of all of this for House Speaker Mike Johnson. There was a lot of uncertainty swirling around whether this would make it over the finish line. Now it appears it will. Has this strengthened him or weakened his speakership? How do you see this playing out, Sahil?
Well, Kristen, the rule vote is not exactly a major win for Speaker Johnson. It's the equivalent of you and I getting up and going to work. It's an automatic thing. It should happen all the time. It's only an event when it doesn't happen. And this is emblematic of Speaker Johnson and House GOP leaders' struggle to corral this conference. And it happens at exactly the same time that President Trump's approval rating is declining, not just with the public overall, but crucially here in the House of Representatives politically with Republican voters. One recent Associated Press poll showed it as low as 68%. That's just his approval among Republicans. A Fox News poll showed it at 83%, which is lower than the sky-high 90+% that Trump has had over the last year, which is critical to him being able to twist arms and get people in line. So there's also the fact that the president is a little bit distracted from domestic affairs by the war in Iran, as you can imagine, has a little bit less time to make calls here and twist arms.
So what are the implications of all of this for other Republican priorities like funding DHS? DHS remains shut down.
Yeah, so right after this vote, Kristen, they're going to be voting on the budget resolution that passed the Senate, which begins work on that party line bill to fund ICE and CBP. Remember, they ripped this out of the bipartisan DHS bill because they couldn't come to a deal with Democrats. This is another thing that Speaker Johnson has struggled to win enough votes in the House to do. Many Republicans in his conference have refused to vote on the bill to reopen DHS that passed the Senate unanimously until there's work done, until maybe even the reconciliation bill itself passes. So they want ICE and CBP funded before the rest of DHS is funded, which has slowed everything down. This is another area where Speaker Johnson has been somewhat overrun by his conference because, like the White House, he did want to open up DHS earlier because we're now on day 74 of the shutdown. It's a record-long shutdown, and it could have serious implications for paychecks and create another TSA crisis if it doesn't get resolved soon, Kristen.
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's been 74 days. Sahil, thank you so much. Joining me now to discuss all of this, today's panel, Kadia Goba, politics reporter for Notice, Chuck Rocha, co-host of the Latino Vote podcast and president of Solidarity Strategies, and Ashley Davis, veteran of the George W. Bush White House and author of the new book, The Power Pivot with Grit, Grace, and Growth. Thanks to all of you. Congratulations, Ashley, on your
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, we will have to get
You
that
have a
and
really
read
long
it.
title, and now I have a really long title.
Your title just got longer. Kadia, let me start with you. Sure. Let's talk about what is happening on Capitol Hill. So much uncertainty whether, as Sahil says, this measure, the reauthorization of 702 Surveillance Act, would pass. The fact that it has been held up this long is a problem and speaks to some of the dysfunction.
Yeah, Kristen, let me preface this by saying it's not only the FISA bill. There's also the Farm Bill. And as Sahil mentioned, the DHS bill. Now, members of Congress went through this 2 weeks ago. They spent hours on Capitol Hill with no results and ended up leaving at like 1:30 in the morning, having a failed vote on FISA. So the prospect of this passing has improved because all of them came back to the table, White House included, and, kind of added some more protections, not necessarily the warrant that some of the hard right members are wanting, but I think they've moved it enough to get more Democrats to cover those votes that they'll lose on the right. So it is looking promising is what I'm hearing in terms of FISA. But it has just been an incredible week of frustrated members and ongoing angst.
Speaker Johnson has had so many challenges corralling his Republican conference. Could this undercut his leadership? Could it jeopardize it?
Well, listen, I mean, there are many factions of the Republican Party right now, and obviously you have the extreme right that are very powerful, because even if there are, let's say there's mainly 7, really are able to make a difference because he has such few votes. But what's interesting is Kevin McCarthy is the one that put some of the extreme right on the Rules Committee. Historically, the Rules Committee is made up of the Speaker's allies. So the Speaker has inherited that. I actually think that Johnson pulled off a miracle today, and how it happened, that rule connected both the Farm Bill, FISA, and also this budget reconciliation bill. The Farm Bill was it was passed in the rule, but they're not going to handle the Farm Bill, this ethanol piece for farmers, until after the recess. And so they're just voting tonight on FISA and the budget, and I think both will pass.
Given that, could it actually embolden him, Ashley, do you think?
Listen, I don't know how anyone can take on this management. I think Nancy Pelosi was the best manager of the Speaker I've ever seen. I think she was a really good manager. But I think the Speaker has done a really good job with the cards he's been dealt.
Chuck, as you know, when you look at the polling, voters don't have a whole lot of confidence in either party. Why should they have more confidence in Democrats if they were, for example, to win back the House, to do a better job when they would be dealing with a Republican White House? And we'd have to see what happens in the Senate.
Sahil made a great comment about the popularity or the lacking of popularity of Donald Trump. I would remind everybody at home that Donald Trump is still twice as popular as the U.S. Congress, no matter which party you're talking about, because folks are frustrated.
Yes,
they're frustrated that they don't feel their lives getting any better. And to your question about why and what Democrats could do, right now in campaigns that I'm running from coast to coast, we're talking about Democrats being a check on the power of the Senate or the president to try to have some compromise to actually get something done. They're hearing about FISA. They're hearing about these things that have to do with DHS, this and that. But none of that says, my friend Ashley will laugh at me, has anything to do with gas prices or has to do with other things, because we have to stay on message about that because that's what the American people feel.
Yeah, I mean, how concerned are you? I mean, gas prices went up again overnight.
Yeah, it's a very big concern, and it's a very big concern going into the midterm. I think even talking to many Republicans, I think that they see the writing on the wall, which this is why democracy works. If people are mad, they vote out who's in charge. And I think there will be a major change, at least in the House. I'm not there on the Senate. I think our numbers are a little bit stronger there. But as Chuck's saying, if Jeffries is the new speaker, which I'm assuming he would be if the Democrats win, I think he may have a bigger margin, which will make it a little bit easier for him to get pieces of legislation through, which won't pass in the Senate.
But with what we just saw with the Supreme Court today, that could change. You were reporting earlier about there could be lines being drawn in the next 30 days that could really change Johnson having more of favor of us having even a smaller majority because they may get rid of 5 or 10 seats.
Kadia, let me turn to you on James Comey. This latest indictment of James Comey for this picture that he posted of the seashells, 8647, basically saying get rid of 47 being the 47th president of the United States, President Trump. How is this playing out politically? Because what we are seeing is it feels like the partisan divides are deepening over this with accusations that this is a purely political indictment.
I don't see it bleeding into the midterms, but it does.
You don't? Okay.
I do see Democrats, jumping on the opportunity to use the president's talking points about political persecution. And I even heard a Democrat say today that Jerome Powell's investigation is very costly. So there they are tapping into that, affordability element with saying like the government is spending a lot of money on investigations that are going to go nowhere. So, I mean, I don't think voters, it'll resonate with voters. I think it's just a political football that actual lawmakers will have to deal with, in the judicial system, obviously.
Chuck, James Comey is one of those fascinating figures in Washington who has plenty of enemies on both sides.
Thank you for saying that. I just fixed to jump in, please.
How will Democrats see this moment? You do have legal experts saying this may have been the wrong move, but it doesn't make it indictable.
I asked lawyers last night on TV, and I talked to lawyers a lot, Ashley, but I talked to a lawyer last night about this particular thing and saying, can you just take a picture to a grand jury to get an indictment? And he's like, sure you can, but it doesn't mean that there's proof that that somebody said they wanted to kill somebody. And this is not going to, you're exactly right, it's not going to be an election thing, and you're not going to have Democrats running to James Comey's defense. They remember what he did to Hillary Clinton. Right. But they do use this as one more example of his reach of trying to take control of something and the retribution piece. Voters don't like that piece. They don't like to see their government being retributions against anybody. They think that power should be used for the government, not on its citizens.
Ashley, what about that idea of retribution? Todd Blanche is the acting attorney general. He's not the attorney general yet. So the accusation you're hearing from a number of Democrats is this is a move by him to try to get that job. Yeah.
Right, or it's a play to the base that does hate Comey. But listen, I think this started, and I'm not going to pick political sides here. This started with the Russian collusion this has been, the Justice Department has been politicized for way too long on both sides. And I think that this is another political issue that nothing's going to come out of this. I think it's a freedom of speech issue, actually, that is why he probably won't be indicted. But I just think that the Justice Department, when I was in the Bush White House, that's not how it worked. And it's been that way for the last 8 years.
Chuck, pick up on that point, because how does the country step back from what Ashley is describing, which is that there is skepticism on both sides about the Justice Department? I don't mean this Justice Department, right. I mean in general.
And right now we're moving into a midterm election. And for all of you at home, that's different than a presidential. Normally you have about 40% less people that show up. So it's about turnout and motivation. To Ashley's point, this could be a strategy to get your base to show up when they normally wouldn't. But also, to your point, it could get people to step back and go, I'm not even going to show up in the midterms. I'm going to wait till the next presidential. And that's not what we don't want.
Yeah, Kadia, you've said you don't see it playing a huge role in the midterms. And I guess the question is, could it get dropped quickly? My colleague Kelly O'Donnell asked Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, how do you prove intent when you're dealing with a picture, which is part of the point that Ashley's making?
I think Republicans are going to have a hard time defending this and defending that this is a viable case that they should put energy in. And you'll see all of us on the Hill asking Republicans this week whether this is a viable case and should they pursue it. So it's going to put Republicans, I think, in a really uncomfortable position to defend this.
Well, it's always that hallway interview that gets a little tricky. Sure. Thank you all so much for a great conversation, Kadia, Chuck, and Ashley. We are back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. There is much more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.